this is the essence of dying, to just let go, to dive down without any ground under your feet. This is the step out of control.
Miss Beate, you had a near-death experience after an electricity accident as a child. What exactly happened?
I was about 4 years old, and it happened in our family home in a small village. It was in the evening and time for me to go to bed. I used to have a wooden crib that I slept in at the time, that had 2 rods taken off in the middle for me to crawl in and out on my own, so I could leave my bed if I wanted to. I was in bed and was playing around with my bedside lamp. I'd unscrewed the light bulb and I, as I recall now, also touched the socket and reached into the socket with my fingers. I felt the electricity run through my left arm. And then, like a grown-up with his fist, like a big boxer hitting my little child-sized heart, it was an absolutely unbearable pain. And right in the next moment, I was no longer in my little crib. I suddenly was floating through the air in my room and hovering underneath the ceiling. The whole room was dark, and I was suddenly in the space of my room. And there was only an orange nightlight next to the door glowing softly. That nightlight was just supposed to bring a very soft touch of glow into the darkness of my room at night. I was able to see myself sitting upright in my crib, and everything slowed down in this situation, and the pain was gone. I was totally surprised, but at the same time, everything seemed good or okay. Everything seemed all right. But all right sounds a little bit too judgmental. It was rather a state of being. It was all good, and I perceived that state of being very closely. It was a sense of well-being.
You saw yourself and your surroundings from a perspective outside your body. What exactly happened next? What was this unique experience like for you as a child?
After this out-of-body experience with me floating just underneath the ceiling, I suddenly realized that the ceiling had opened up, and I was gliding into the blackness. Today I would describe it as the blackness of the universe, but at the time it was just blackness, a vast black space without any stars or any other sources of light. And I was sucked into it. It was not my decision. I was sucked into it at an extremely fast pace, at breakneck speed. And while I was going into this black space, I knew I was dying. I knew exactly what was going on. I was dying, and I didn't want to die. I wanted to hear the birds sing. Those were my thoughts at that moment. And then I was, in a flash of an instant, sitting in our garden as a child. I was sitting on the lawn, and our house was behind me. I could see a little garden door to my left, and the sun is shining, and suddenly I was back in my room, in my crib, and in my body.
After your near-death experience, did you ever try to tell your parents that you had been that close to death?
No, because as a 4-year-old, I had this experience, but it was as if I had understood Albert Einstein's theory of relativity at the age of 4. Experienced and understood, but not at all been able to find the right words to talk about that at that early age. I was not able to talk to my parents about it. I was not really fully aware that I had been that close to death either. It was just part of my past everyday life experiences. I used to think that this was absolutely normal, just something you do. Sometimes I was gathering snails, and sometimes I was riding my bike, and sometimes I was out of my body. But I remember I had trouble falling asleep at night, and I was afraid of that black space when I was supposed to fall asleep, because being out of my body in my dark room was okay. And I was very aware of the fact that time slowed down a great deal as well. I had perceived that very clearly. But as a 4-year-old, to be suddenly sucked into this vast blackness and to know that you were dying, at an age when you are actually just beginning to conquer the world and only just beginning to grasp what there is to know about the world and what there is to learn in this world. And I had always been very eager to learn and get to know things all my life. And dying, I was maybe not even aware of the word dying, but I was aware that it meant going away from everything that I was just starting to get to know about in this world and starting to mentally grasp and conquer in this world.
So, as a result of your near-death experience, you developed a fear of falling asleep during your childhood?
Absolutely. I should say it was actually some kind of trauma processing. Fear is too small a word for that. It was sheer panic. It was the panic of not wanting to admit that I was avoiding what was unavoidable, what would definitely happen in the future at some point. I knew I had to die at some point. But I really had to split off that realization of my conscious mind because I couldn't deal with it at that young age. I have to say that I have had to take that as an emotional burden with me for 40 years of my life. Also that I had to wake up screaming at night because I was in a panic, knowing I'm going into this vast blackness. I was dying.
The black space stands for having to say goodbye for good, for letting go, for leaving everything behind.
It stands for nothing, emptiness, a lack of everything. And the scary thing is that it is actually much more real than reality itself. Even though I actually had already realized as a child and as a teenager that it is impossible to be inside of nothing if you can actually experience the nothingness and be aware inside of this vast emptiness. This was a lot more real going into the black space. This was a huge discrepancy in itself, but I just always went into a place of fear and panic, mentally and emotionally.
What was the effect of all that on you while you were growing up?
I was always, even as a child, interested in topics that dealt with in between the worlds, this side and the other side, even though I want to emphasize that there is no this world and the next. They are both intertwined and intertwining, and everything is interwoven and interweaving and connected, but we cannot call it anything else but this world and the next with our weak human words. And I've always felt like a person who crosses the borders between these two worlds that weren't actually apart, but that everyone else, all other people, parents, teachers, considered as partially coherent and accepted, and then again consisted of other things that were not accepted and not coherent as part of this reality. I was always trying to cross over and connect these two parts of one whole that everyone else experienced as totally apart from each other. And I was not astonished why, if when, at the age of 11, I was nearly under the wheels in an accident on the road with two other children, one 13 and one 14 years of age, one of them dead and one severely handicapped for life. I was not astonished at all when I saw that boy that had actually just died, when I saw that boy standing at the bus stop on the other side of the street.
How did this accident occur?
I was about to cross the street with 4 older boys. It was early in the morning and it was still dark outside. We had to catch the school bus on the other side of the street. We were about to cross the street and I was a little bit behind them when it happened. There was a huge light and a crash, and suddenly, when I came to see what this was all about, I was actually sitting on the pavement, even though I had been on the street just seconds before. I realized at once that it was an accident, and a tragic one. While I was still wondering why I was sitting on the pavement, I saw one of the boys standing on the other side of the street. I saw him standing there at the bus stop with his green Parker jacket and his brown school bag in his hand. I saw nobody else there in my mind's eye, even though I think there were other people running around at that moment. Then this accident was dealt with, and police and emergency services arrived, and my mother decided to take me home instead of to school, and I was riding my bike in our village, and I didn't know what exactly had happened to the other boys involved.
You didn't know those other boys?
Yes, I knew them, but in the dark I didn't recognize them that morning. Passing one of the boys' parents' house in the street, His parents asked me, "Have you got any idea what happened to our son? We heard there was a bad accident this morning." And I said, "Oh, I saw him standing at the bus stop. Maybe he went to school." His parents were consoled by that. But in the evening, my mother told me he had died immediately in the accident. For years I couldn't go to that side of our village anymore, because I had told those parents that I had seen their son standing at the bus stop. Years later, when I was already grown up, my sister asked me to go and talk to them and tell them that I had actually seen their son standing at the bus stop. But I replied that I had already told them. They knew it already.
With all of these instances in your youth, how did you look at your life during those years?
In my youth, except for my time at school, I only felt at home in music, because it is something extremely honest, so straightforward, especially Bach and so on, old music. Because music is simply a part of the universe. That was something dear to me. I didn't have any friends except some people that I knew because of a connection in music, and making music together with my father. That was the basis, the substance of my life. I was on my own a lot, going through the forest and in our village and in churches, playing the organ there, because that was the most intense feeling of coherence and connectedness that I could reach. The topics that others were mostly interested in, the disco, where I never went, or jeans or school, were merely wrapping paper in my understanding of the world, just outward appearance and nothing of substance. My topics were mostly being in between the worlds, because it was more real to me than anything else. I was also looking for my counterpart in it too, because of all my experiences. I saw myself as a universe within me, and me inside the universe around me, and I measure the depth of all of it in all I am doing. What I needed and what I wanted to find is someone who can understand that, who can feel and experience that with me, without even talking about it or explaining that. Also just to be fully aware of all that together with me. These were high expectations, of course, but I never articulated any of them either. I just expected that and dealt with it on my own.
Ultimately, you discovered the book Consciousness Beyond Life by Pim van Lommel, as you have told me in our first conversation. And this book has a lot of meaning for you. Why is that?
I had heard about him and Moody, of course. Moody's books were on my bookshelf when I was a teenager, and I read them eagerly. But I never connected them with something that I had experienced. I speak Dutch, and I read them in the original Dutch. And then I read the lines that, for 95% of the people involved, it is a positive experience, and for 5% of the people involved, it is a negative experience, either staying in a stage of darkness or dark space, or experiences of a scary or hellish impact. And then I read and reread the same sentence over and over again, because for the first time someone actually recognized the fact that you could just remain in dark space. I was immensely happy about that, of course. And then I read about near-death experiences in childhood. And the third reason given was already electricity accidents. And I was crying and laughing at the same time, because it was all coming together like puzzle pieces at once. 40 years of my life, and suddenly I had the key to this lock in my hand that I've been trying to find all my life. It just all fell into place.
Were you able to acknowledge another meaning of that dark space?
Yes, absolutely. I realized I had already gone part of the way with my out-of-body experience, probably with a small heart attack, in the dark space with my thoughts. I don't want to die. I want to hear the birds sing. A short sequence in my parents' garden, and I was back in my body. And when telling my parents about my near-death experience after that, I had tried to tell them before, but then they were just alone with me, the three of us. I was explaining the short sequence in their garden, and the little garden door, and the sun coming from one side, I suddenly realised it had never just been the dark space. It had always been the scene full of light, the beautiful moment of a positive experience as well.
In der Pforte drin, so wie ich das Gefühl habe, ich war in dem schwarzen Raum mit meinem Bewusstsein. Mein Bewusstsein ist
The gateway experience was there, the light was there, but I was not ready to go through that gateway yet. I was receding into my body. But now it is a sound and round experience for me, with a positive ending. And I'm very, very happy about that.
Do you think that all of your experiences in your childhood are now dealt with sufficiently? Or do you think there could be some other parts in it that you still could come to terms with in the future?
Let me put it this way. Just as Pim van Lommel's book has been a key in a lock for me, opening up the realization that I was finally able to understand that I had actually gone through a near-death experience myself, which has put me in contact with a lot of other meaningful events, moments, dreams, and visions in my whole life since then, having given me the chance to encounter them, to accompany other people because of them. In just the same way, my near-death experience is another key for me to continue on a quest to put it all together, bring it all together, bring it into a context, to combine it all further. I have a family. I have 5 children who are grown up. I'm working. I work with my husband on things, and yet there is something... Because I found out 2.5 years ago that I had had a near-death experience myself, and what that means to me. It's as if I suddenly have the picture of a handyman's toolkit in my mind. It's as if I had previously just been fumbling around on the outside of this toolkit. And now it's open, and I have a hammer and pliers and all kinds of other tools at hand. And with them, that I am allowed to, and that I can, and that I must, and that I should work, and use them to help shape life and the universe. And I realise that it has always been that way, ever since I had been pushed into this calling at the age of 4. It was an electricity accident. And this means that there was electricity flowing, that means energy, and that I should understand and that I should make others aware of that energy that is flowing through all of us, this binding and connecting energy, this inner and outer energy, this outward and inward energy, that it's flowing through all of us, and that everyone is allowed to trust that energy that is running through us all, and that everyone is allowed to let himself be formed and transformed by this energy that is running through us all.
A special area of interest of yours is awareness research, and you're also translating books on that field. How did this work out? Is this a result of your steady efforts to work on and clear up your own near-death experience and your other visions?
It has actually grown organically, because in our near-death experience support group, it came up that someone was interested in the topic of the Academy of Consciousness. So we exchanged some information on the subject, and I came across an interview with Waldo Vieira, the founder of the Academy of Consciousness. And honestly, while I was listening to this for a quarter of an hour, I agreed with each and every one of his sentences. I could have actually made a check next to each and every one of his statements. I don't want to say, yes, that is true, but instead that I feel the same way about it. The science of consciousness deals with all that, with the bodies that we are moving around in, and that we are consciousness, and that we are able to move around just being in a body of consciousness, and how we can be in touch with others in that consciousness. In the science of consciousness, you also get a toolkit put into your hands, if you want to do research and to permeate the universe, one's own consciousness and one's own environment, that of others, this world and the next.
Is that your definition of a human being? That we are consciousness and not bodies?
Yes, definitely, absolutely.
Consciousness is something different, something greater, and something more comprehensive than just intellectual activity, brain activity.
I can say that I experienced a key point in my life about a year ago when I was going to have an operation, and I had to decide at the hospital whether to have an anaesthetic or not. And suddenly it terrified me, with hot and cold shivers going through my body, that at essence it meant giving up control of one's own consciousness. For about a quarter of an hour I was just going through the feeling of the essence of that loss of control, and tears washed down my face when I had to think about it. That this is the essence of dying, to just let go, to dive down without any ground under your feet. That this is the step out of control, like in death. If we let go of the rational control over our own consciousness, we can get somewhere that forms us, and that also forms the universe. I acknowledge that this is, in my opinion, a very important state of mind, a very important process for us all.
Thank you so much for your honesty and your open mind that you shared with us concerning your near-death experience and other events in your life. Thank you for this interview.
It was my pleasure.